The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with the News Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, I have Abhishek Mohan. Abhishek is founder and CEO of HempStreet, who are India's first research to retail venture in the Ayurvedic cannabis sector. Welcome, Abhishek. How are you?
Good. Hey, Anuj. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah, no, likewise. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in Bangkok today, actually. I was here to speak day before yesterday. I spoke at the Department of Public Health. Some amazing things happening in Bangkok for patients and around the Thai traditional medicine, very similar to Ayurveda. So very, very encouraging stuff happening in Thailand.
Yeah, that's great. I've not covered Thailand on the show yet, so I'll be sure to look that one up afterwards. But we're here to talk today a bit more about India, actually. We've done an episode before in India, but I really like your take on it, actually. So it'd be great to hear your views and how you see things kind of happening in the medical space and particularly in relation to Ayurveda. But before we go there, we'll do the usual thing. Can you just introduce yourself and maybe tell people a bit about your background and sort of how and why you got into this space?
So, I've been in the startup scene, I would say indirectly in the sidelines since my early teens. And then in my early 20s, I went into the venture building space and, video games, all sunrise sectors, mobile security, fantasy football, and then an incubator in India that I was a co-founder of that we were heavily, I won't go into detail on all those, but they were all exciting. Some of them went from, seed to public listing. So it was I was always kind of attracted to things that were like sunrise industries. And while, being co-founder of the incubator in India, where we built 37 different companies, some of them got on to raise good money, we were quite focused on, not intentionally, but we had a few ventures in the medical healthcare space. And so we had kind of a ringside view of the Indian healthcare scenario, and chronic pain relief was in a terrible state. And the opioid crisis was looming in India. We'd seen what happened in the US. And given these, we saw that cannabis would be the conduit to solve some of these issues and primarily to stop the opioid crisis in India. And that's how HempStreet became an idea. And then as we researched, we realized there was a perfectly legal, federally legal way to deliver medical cannabis responsibly to patients directly through doctors. And that was Ayurveda. We had a pharmacopoeia that was age old. So we revived that pharmacopoeia. We're putting it through the clinical validation process and kind of taking these mass ailments head on, where we've gone for unpopular, unsexy, things. We're not in cosmetics or, anything fashionable. We went after menstrual cramps, women's health, health of the aging population, stuff like that. I think things that really where the opioid crisis stemmed from.
Yeah. That's brilliant and a great background to sort of enter a new emerging space. Was it the challenge of a new kind of misunderstood sector, or was there any other kind of personal connection with cannabis and how it can help people?
Well, Ayurveda, yes. My great-grandfather was a famous Ayurveda doctor and a philanthropist. And obviously his children, but he was also very progressive. He saw at that time the decline in publishing, and then he educated all his children in Western medicine, although some of my mom's cousins continue the practice. So coming back to it, it's not like this is something I planned, but coming back to it is kind of a homecoming for me. But having been part of building several companies and several kind of emerging businesses, you tend to develop an unbiased honesty. So if you look at a problem, you develop a sense of honesty on how you think you can solve it. So even with cannabis, we skipped the sexiness and went to how it could be used as a conduit to solve the problem we're trying to solve. So I think it was a new sector, but the experience in being in several businesses gave me a lens where I could find the optimal way to solve the problem. So you start from the problem, right? You don't start saying like, yeah, it's the sexiest industry. You want to get into cannabis, you get crazy valuations, the girls love you and all that. Well, it doesn't apply to me because I'm married, but all that stuff. But we chose to focus on the problems that we needed to solve. And you'll see that in our focus. We don't have hundreds of products. We have 3. We've built scale. We've ensured a blockchain-based tracking mechanism to ensure that there's no Pillmilling, which is what the opioid crisis was about. We've made sure we went after ailments that people really needed help with, and we understood the regulatory framework. We've we believe in Ayurveda, we believe in the formulation, but we also believe in scientific validation. So I think you'll see all that in our execution. I mean, I can say whatever, but if you take our company and dissect it, you'll see that we've retained that motto and that execution. And that, I would say, we've kept it real from day one till now.
That's fantastic. And I've got a couple of questions, but pill milling, I've not heard that phrase before. What does that mean?
So essentially with opioids, what happened was opioids, see, I mean, I get a lot of friends, especially, people that are in palliative care saying, I hope you're not asking to ban opioids because I talk about them a lot. Opioids are not bad. I mean, they're essential for people with absolutely acute pain and palliative care, but they were dispensed wrongly, right? You had in the US I won't mention the names because I don't have a big legal firm, but these guys basically paying doctors to prescribe. So pill mill is basically you have a doctor in Hicksville somewhere, and he gets delivered a bulk stuff, or he just keeps pushing a button on e-prescriptions. And essentially now you've got this little doctor in, I don't know, Hicksville, wherever, prescribing tens of millions of dollars worth of, or this little pharmacy that people drive to buy in bulk. That's how the opioid crisis played out. It became a street drug because it was not prescribed right. It was not responsibly dispensed. I mean, all these medicines have their use, but dispensation is the key, right? Otherwise it becomes a drug. So that's a pill mill when you have, basically somebody just peddling it.
Yeah, understood. And that's quite well documented, actually. And we recently had a show on opioids too, so it's good to kind of elaborate on that stuff. I come from an Indian background, and I certainly know that I received some stigma from my family when I sort of told them what I was doing. Is that the same case for you or in India in general? Or was there more acceptance through the route of Ayurveda?
So again, in Ayurveda, like cannabis, like the whole concept of the cannabis industry was something that Wall Street needed, right? To have a bunch of listed companies. But it was the idea of carving it into because, cannabis for us in Ayurveda is usually, it's a component of a formulation. It serves a purpose, whether it's anti-inflammatory or, taking anxiety out, but it's not here's cannabis, but on the ritualistic side, on the religious side, yes, it is consumed by itself, but on the medical side, it was a component. It served a pharmaceutical function within a concoction, like our menstrual cramps product, right? It basically, the amount of THC in the typical dose is very, very low. It would not do anything for you from a psychotropic angle, but it activates the anti-inflammatory properties of the remaining components, which you'll see on our product. And that's the idea. That's kind of the functional difference between the move towards finding like the minutest detail of the cannabinoid towards, or to use cannabis as a formulation. Now on the stigma, yes, in 1985 we had the NDPS Act, and yeah, it really, people were getting arrested. Even today, recreational is very illegal. Growing is very illegal. So yes, there was an idea that we thought that stigma would be a big problem, but it was not. In fact, which is why we go through doctors. We won the trust of the doctors because the doctors were very pro cannabis because they understood what it was used for. We were able to provide them a secure, standardized, responsibly, managed and dispensed method of giving it to their patients. So, in fact, our first ailments came out of conversation with hundreds of doctors before we even decided what our first product was going to be. It wasn't like I had a brainwave about menstrual cramps. There's no way I was exposed to it, especially in a country like India, which is, it's not something, it's taboo, right? I mean, talking about menstruation. And it's not like I knew it and I went and built it. It's from the data, from the conversations we have with doctors, that we understood the extent of that problem. That's how we chose the ailments: menstrual cramps, irritable bowel syndrome, sexual wellness. These are all things that were brought to our notice, and we built products for those. So again, in Ayurveda, the doctor is like a GP and a pharmacy at the same time, right? And it's a reputation business. It's not, a doctor loses his standing in society, which is very important in small town India, because his father may have treated your father, and he is treating you, and yet you trust your children with him, and he's like the wise person in the village. So I think that kind of, for us, it was to help the doctors understand that we were not here to make a quick buck, and that we were, basically in for the long haul. Once that happened, and the patients have so much trust, they take what the doctor gives them. And the doctor is not an easy person to convince. It took us years to get, we scaled phenomenally fast. After the first couple of thousand doctors were on, and we had some senior doctors, they saw the results of the product. Today, we're arguably the biggest dispensation network in the world at 9,100 clinics. I don't think there's any other brand that has this kind of network.
Wow, that's fantastic. And, we'll get on to talk a bit about the wider relationship in India in a second. First, we'll talk about HempStreet. But I think what you're saying kind of mirrors a lot of what I see in terms of where we are in the UK or how far behind we are. And that's primarily because I don't feel that doctors are bought in enough on it yet. And they have not been convinced in the same way that a lot of the doctors that you speak to. I mean, there are a few great doctors who are sort of pushing it and trying to get it more widespread, but doctor education is really key to opening this up, I think. And so it's
Absolutely.
great to hear that you're enjoying some success with that. And so maybe this is a good place to sort of talk a bit more about HempStreet and what you guys do there.
So essentially, we're a research to retail player. So we undertake R&D with the top government research facility in India called CSIR. Absolutely brilliant people. They're one of the world leaders in plant-based medicine. And they've been doing research. That's the thing about India. They allow you to research on things that are currently illegal because they're still research, right? So they've been a real driving force for us. In fact, I'd like to mention that while we are also working on scientific validation for Ayurvedic products, we've also recently won the first ever biotech grant by the Indian government for a cannabis company for a transdermal patch that we are developing that'll be a world's first of its kind. And it's been developed together with CSIR. I mean, that's the thing about the Indian government as well. They support us. I mean, the research that we get from CSIR is probably worth millions of dollars. And it's the brain power, like the mentors that we have and the scientists that work with us. The brain power is pound for pound better than, as good as anywhere in the world, but it's highly subsidized so that we have access to that powerful research. And a small company like us coming up with the world first Western type product is unheard of, right? So, and we can do it because of that support.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And again, similar. I think some government support is needed to really push this on because it's difficult to go the normal routes, I think, for drug development that other treatments have kind of gone down. So let's go and focus a bit more about India now. And, we'll talk a bit about pain and the opioid crisis in India, because when you mention opioid crisis, everyone immediately thinks of the US, but actually India is an even bigger kind of problem. But we'll talk about that in a second. Just before then, would you mind just giving us a bit of background on India's general relationship to Ayurveda and then in particular cannabis?
So about 70% of India uses Ayurveda in some form. And so does North America. And the West Coast, Ayurveda is extremely popular, but you just don't realize you're doing it. But yeah, 70% of India takes Ayurveda in some form. Ayurveda has, been around for a long, long time, but it's also evolved. It's not, when you say alternative medicine, it makes it sound inferior, right? Ayurveda is today exported to 140 countries. It's recognized as a medical form in Japan and Germany and Hungary and various other countries. Sold as a nutraceutical in many forms. People started consuming single herbs. The overarching influence of yoga, which is not quite Ayurveda, but it is also a kind of the soft diplomacy that's kind of gotten people in the West to also embrace Ayurveda. So it's quite prevalent in India. It's for non-emergency situations in many places. It is the first line of medication that people take. For ongoing wellness, it is the first line of medication. So it's extremely popular. And, my mom, everybody that I know consumes some sort of it.
Yeah. Let's go with original medicine rather than alternative medicine, given that it's, long in its history. And I've heard you speak a few times and you talk a lot about cannabis being part of Ayurveda. So is a key part of Ayurveda like a multi kind of ingredient or multi medication approach to things? And that might be individual to you, your physiology, different to me and mine.
Absolutely. So I think one of the reasons why we chose the doctor route is that if it's something medical, I think a doctor should be involved, right? It's again, Ayurveda respects the individuality of the body into certain types, right? I'll toss you some details about another day because I'll be here all night talking to you about it. But the idea is it's not for everybody. I would love to go out and say, everybody just buy my product. Let's do e-prescriptions, just medicate yourself. That's not the case, right? There's certain body types where cannabis is not suitable, even though it's bad for business for me. If the doctor says no, it's no. Like there's certain body types and there's certain individual, the idea is you can't just keep suppressing symptoms, which has become something we've been used to. Just toss a pill and make you forget the symptom. You can't break something to fix something. So the whole concept of Ayurveda is body balance, which is why, you find that it easily transitions into nutraceuticals or food or any of that, depending on your because it's geared towards a certain body balance. So, and again, cannabis is one component. So in ritualistic practices, in festivals, yes, you consume cannabis in its plain form, makes you high and you do whatever you have to do and, dance and sing and pray. Or if you want to reach a higher level of consciousness, which is what people say, you consume it individually. But as medicine, there's a great understanding in what cannabis is good and what it's bad at. And based on that, it's the quantities, what is mixed with it. Do you have something that's a mood enhancer? Do you have something that, makes sure that unlocks a certain part of something? Does it mix with something else? Does it enhance immunity? So for all these uses, cannabis has over 280 formulations in Ayurveda, and each one with different components that harnesses a certain part of cannabis, but also has its own thing.
And so to peel another layer off the onion, cannabis isn't a homogenous product, right? There are many, many different strains which have different makeups within them. How does that fit into, a wider list of ingredients?
Absolutely. So I think, this whole idea of cannabinoid composition, again, it matters a lot more when the amount of cannabis is large. It matters a lot more when you're trying to find an individual use for an individual cannabinoid, which is completely fair. Sure, you can do that. But for example, like I said, our menstrual cramps product has 62.5 mg of leaf powder, out of which the cannabinoid, your main cannabinoid composition will be quite low. It's from leaf powder. So it's not the whole idea of the psychotropic element, all that doesn't apply when it's a polyherbal situation. So I completely agree with, there's some people doing great work around opioid replacement. Actually, I'll touch upon the opioids when we talk about it, but it's a grave situation. So I'm always on the lookout on people that can do something about opioids, about weaning people off opioids, because what we are doing now is trying to find an alternative to people that haven't been put on opioids, right? But there are people that are on opioids, and I'll tell you the extent when we get to that question, I guess. But there's people doing some good work, and there is some talk about high doses of CBD working, and there's green flag, the clinical trial that's about to start in the US by these guys. I'd spoken to them as well. I don't know if I have the liberty to disclose it, or maybe it might have been confidential information, so I can't tell you their name. But I'm completely for that. I mean, research is absolutely good. But the idea that people say, okay, Ayurveda is, how can it work when every strain is different? No, the land races in India have a particular profile. But even then, the quantity of cannabis that's used, and it's leaf powder, it's not oils or it's not flour, it's leaf powder. So as a result, it is included for a junior major function, but a junior function. So these things don't apply.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's still a bit of a challenge to the Western paradigm of the sort of analytical, must know exact amounts of ingredients and exactly what they're doing. And I think that's probably a bit of where East needs to meet West, somewhere in the middle, hopefully. But I like that. I had Dr. Rachel Knox on ages ago to talk about the endocannabinoid system, and we were talking about whole plants. I love the way she described it in terms of the major cannabinoid, let's say THC or CBD, is actually working on the receptors, but then it was almost the poetry to it in that all the other bits of the plant help to break it down very nicely and get it out of your system in a very efficient way. And that's how the whole thing works together. And I really like that as a concept.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, you can't make something famous just because you don't know anything else, right? I mean, if you've just discovered a cannabinoid, yeah, it's great, but don't banish the others that you don't know anything about. That's the entourage effect, right? Don't kill the entourage, man.
Completely. So then let's dig in a bit on pain and opioids. And yeah, like I said, the US story is very well publicized, but perhaps not as many people know about just how big an issue it is in India.
Yeah. So I'll give you a few numbers that will shake you to the core. There are 23 million opioid users in India. 23 million. 1.3 million will probably die in the next 2 years. There are families. I mean, I would say the villains from North America are operating in India under different names. They've started doing the same shit. They basically, under table stuff. And then, yeah, it's in Northern India, seeing a lot of the same issues. And we don't have the kind of, the US spent $1 trillion so far, right? Trying to combat the fallout. We don't have those kind of resources. That's half the GDP, third of the GDP of India. So under a third, I would say, depending on nominal or whatever. So, but you get my drift. India could just fall into chaos if that had happened in India, it looks like it's about to happen. But I think there's a lot of people like us, and that's why we want to build a robust infrastructure. We have today, using the blockchain, we know exactly what product goes to which doctor. We know when there's overordering, we can immediately do some recon and figure out what's going on and shut it down. I think that should have happened with opioids. But in India, yeah, it's a huge, huge problem. It's a huge problem. Some people have written articles, but makes the US opioid crisis look like a trial version.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's still something to laugh about. It's very distressing. And what is the general feeling on trying to address that? Is it being recognized at a governmental level? And,
Yes.
the warning signs there from North America?
I think India is over the last, I would say, half decade or a decade, India is kind of maturing as a country. And, we're seeing, we've been the pharmacy of the world. We manufacture, a third of the world's generics. So we've built that competence. Wealth has been created over the last decade, a lot more billionaires, a lot more giving, a lot more, focus on quality of life, a lot more, less me and a lot more us. I think, people like myself, like I was pretty individualistic, growing up because it was a country that didn't have much. We were growing up aspiring to be like America, all of us kids in the 90s or 80s. So I think now we're all, having been abroad, I think there's the element of wanting to improve, also recognizing privilege. And I think that's changing a lot of people, and that's changing the government, it's changing healthcare, changing the ability to see the common person as somebody that deserves better. And I think that's an amazing transition we're seeing in our country. And I think and the government sees it too. And again, building generics for the rest of the world has made us also quite powerful. Now we're generating IP. Again, when most of the ailments of the world are essentially blockbusters in India, you have a local market that's huge, so which even on a capitalistic front, it is great business, right? So there's, keeping people alive, helping people improve their quality of life is a good business. And even if you're a cold capitalist, it's a great place to be and you're doing good, right? While doing well.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And so to talk about pain in specifically in India, using cannabis as part of a replacement for opioids, what kind of typical other Ayurvedic ingredients are you using in conjunction with that as a substitute to opioids?
So not to substitute opioids, because for acute pain, for the actual use of opioids, I think opioids are good. So I'll tell you what happened in the US, right? You're a mom of two kids, you've been carrying your kids, they've got toddlers and your back hurts, and you go to a doctor and he prescribes you opioids, and now you're an addict in 3 uses. So that kind of situation, or if you have severe menstrual cramps and you've been taking, like in India, for example, I just couldn't believe that women didn't have 355 million women are menstruating in India right now. A menstruating population, and 158 million suffer from debilitating cramps. So they miss 9 or 10 days of work. They can't work at home. I can't believe that they have to take generic stuff, like stuff that you take 5,000 times in your lifetime, from the age of 13 to 46 or whatever. And you're basically you're killing your kidneys with something that deserves its own medicine, right? Something that should be a bit more sustainable. So yeah, our menstrual cramps product has Bambusa aranacea, which is a bamboo silicate, and that's a simple formulation. We've got a couple of proprietary ones that are being preclinical right now. We use ashwagandha and there's one with 14 other herbs, like depending on, they have from between 2 to 14 or 15 different herbs, depending on what function it's to perform. So yeah, and each one has its own. So it's quite complex. It's not, polyherbal formulations are rarely like two or three, they tend to be quite complex.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That is a lot. And would that be do you kind of specify that per person? Do you kind of understand? Personal medicine is fascinating, but obviously quite a complicated area.
So the Ayurvedic doctor, which is why I think that's something I really want to stress here, is that we don't do e-prescriptions. We don't sell directly to consumers. Those are the two things that go from use to abuse, right? Maybe in highly advanced markets, maybe, but I just think we don't know enough about, if you call something medical, it has to go through a doctor. And the doctors they do something called a Prakriti analysis based on the heat of your body and based on your composition. And based on that, they prescribe either cannabis or no cannabis or which product. It's just completely up to the doctor. So I can't really, I never suggest anything to them. My friends reach out with pains and stuff. I direct them to a doctor. We are not doctors. I would say, a biotech company, and we rely completely on the doctors to decide what the patient needs based on their body type.
Yeah. And is there sort of data and evidence base is being built to, again, if you're thinking East meeting West, sort of speaking a language in the middle?
100% of what we're doing. So again, there's something major that's happened. But I can't talk about it right now. It's too early, but I'll tell you about it. Yeah, but that's exactly where we're going. There's two schools of thought, right? Should we invent a product and then figure out an ailment for it? should we R&D and then figure out if there's a product to be made out of it? Or in the case of Ayurveda, see, it's not e-commerce or crypto, where something has already been built abroad and there's no base of it before it was built, right? It was the OGs were, whatever, Bitcoin, whatever. So I wouldn't want to reinvent the wheel there. I mean, like if people build on top of Ethereum. Also fascinating subject for me. But anyway, stick to what we do. So in Ayurveda, there's such a vast pharmacopoeia now, right? So you've got 280, 300 formulations. Wouldn't you rather take that through the scientific validation process? Because these are all formulations that have very specific uses for, right? Which we are now only scratching the surface. I mean, look at the medical side. Okay, recreational is great. It's made a lot of money. It's doing, tens of billions of dollars. But medical, you've got GW, you've got, a handful of companies with even smaller level of IP, right? So why would you not harness this ancient wisdom, but validate it, but take it through a scientific validation process? Now you have 300 products that all you need to do is take it through the validation process, right? So yeah, clinical trials, this kind of stuff is everything about what we are. In fact, for our menstrual cramps product, we did possibly one of the biggest data gathering exercises definitely in Ayurveda and Ayurvedic cannabis. And I would say, I don't know more about the clinical trials in cannabis, but we're over 1,000 women that were giving us data, and we have the exact median level of, pain relief at what time, stuff like that. So we've gone out of the way to do things we didn't have to. Again, like I said, this is not an arbitrage business for me. For me, the problems supersede the product or even the plant. Tomorrow, if bananas solve the mass ailments of India, I would shift to selling bananas and banana formulations. So I think that's one thing I really have to stress. We're not here in the cannabis business. Cannabis was the best conduit to solve the mass ailments that we're trying to solve. As much as people now want to write me off because I'm not, but cannabis is working phenomenally, and it has the pharmacopoeia that we've harnessed. But like I said, tomorrow, if gooseberry and banana does it better, we'll probably be a gooseberry and banana company.
Yeah. No, I think it's really useful to, especially in part of this industry, there are some very passionate people involved, but, it's almost, exactly. The cannabis must solve all issues, and it's quite apparent that it doesn't, but let's focus on the ones where it shows the most promise. And if that means using it in conjunction with other ingredients as well, then all the better. But it is ultimately targeting a specific condition rather than making it into something it's not, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing that happened with massive amount of investment that's gone into a lot of overvalued companies, I would say, in North America, right? I mean, which they've all, gone a little bit poof right now. But the issue was that it made two things. One is that because I would say over marketing, it made it feel as though cannabis could solve everything, right? People are like, yeah, it's everything. You can't start your car, pop a cannabis pill, your car's going to start, that's wrong, right? That is very wrong. And then on the recreational, yes, do whatever. It's a personal choice. It's like liquor, but do not make that sound like it's medical. And if it is, there's some people doing some really good work on wellness and, in North America. And I think, that's kind of recreational, but a kind of a responsible recreational. But the just increased THC till you pass out kind of isn't really what this plant, isn't the best thing that this plant can do, right? I mean, it can save lives, can change the quality of life. I'll give you an example now. If somebody does a regression analysis to see the correlation between domestic, like in India, for example, in India, all Indians don't live like me, right? I mean, I have a big house and a pool and everything, but most Indians live in a one room house with, in rural India or small town, not rural, but in small town, one bedroom, one room house with 7 or 8 family members. Now you add chronic pain to that. You add, severe menstrual cramps. It severely impairs the quality of life. Chronic pain, migraines, these things would definitely have an impact. I mean, I am such a terrible person when I have a migraine that I just want to not be around people. Now imagine adding poverty and an overcrowded living environment to that. It's domestic violence. So, I really massive respect for people that capitalistically make a business out of it. It's great. Recreation's good. It's everybody's right. People can want whatever they want. But that's not the fight I'm after, right? I mean, I think there's a chance to use a plant to solve mass ailments, to change the quality of life of hundreds of millions of people in one lifetime. And that's really what some of us should be doing,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's very exciting when you put it in that context. And it's two different industries as far as I'm concerned. And, one's a consumer industry. And, in the UK, I think CBD has sort of had its issues because of that, came on the market and everyone was trying to, claim it was a cure for everything. And as I always say, cannabis can't regrow my amputated arm as much as some very passionate people might claim. And, I think now there's a bit of what's going to happen next with it's a single ingredient, etc. I think this is what you're doing is very exciting. And actually, when we look at anything in the context of India, the scale is just, the number of people is vast, isn't it?
And I think if you look at North America, right, there's 58 million people that practice yoga in the US. The herbal supplements business is about 11 billion US. So that tells you that people are willing they want to try what's natural. They want to try, long-term wellness. Now, I'll give you an example. Now, if you were a wealthy diabetic in America, you didn't think you were unhealthy, right? You were taking your pills, you were great, you were fine, living a normal life. COVID comes along and healthy rich people have died. So then it makes you question, am I healthy? Am I well? Is wellness what is my everyday life about? And wellness is an ongoing process, right? And wellness will always be something. I mean, natural, long-term things are always going to be at the top of the wellness chart rather than a symptom suppressor. So I think that's really where, while I think the scale of issues in India is what kind of got us into this business, we're seeing a very, very big place globally for holistic medicine, and cannabis is no exception. Like in Germany, which is the poster child of EU liberalization for medical cannabis, the most reimbursed medical cannabis product is dronabinol, which is THC, right? And it's been prescribed for anxiety, sleep, and appetite. Now, this is the oldest use of quote unquote weed, right? So that's not innovation. So I think clearly when you say medical, and if all medical forms treated the same, there is no global leadership in what form of medicine. Recreational, yes. But medicine, there is no global leadership in cannabis. And I mean, I would say it's audacious to say, but that's what we want to be. I mean, we want to take a shot at being a global leader with our form of medicine, with scientific validation, because it's wide open.
Yeah, and I think that's a very noble aim as well, and hopefully lots of good will come of it. Abhishek, I'm just conscious of time, so I think we need to wrap up here, but I love what you're doing and I really like your approach, so I'd love to have you back on the show at some point to see how things are developing with HempStreet and you guys.
Will do. I'll be glad to be back. Thanks for giving us the platform.
No, appreciate it. Thank you. Cheers, Abhishek.
Cheers, man.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I work with various cannabis startups to help them get funded and grow. I also work with corporates and international cannabis companies to help them understand and navigate the European cannabis sector. We're working with some great clients across the cannabis value chain and we'd love to help you too. Please visit www.canverse.global to get in touch.